she was originally working on the Indo-European material. You know, she was originally an Indo-Europeanist, and so she came to this point where she would be digging up these graves of, you know, tons of weapons and swords and daggers and all this war tools and so forth. And she went through like a real crisis where she would have nightmares and of violence and destruction. And then at some point she kind of got it, that there was underneath that whole layer of culture, there was these other graves, you know, that weren't like that weren't filled with weapons. And she really realized there was another whole thing there that she had not recognized before. And she changed her career at that point. She gave up studying the Indo-Europeans. She studied the people who came before, you know, and developed that whole theory. And her dreams changed, her nightmares went away, and that was when she got the message of the goddess. But then in the image that I got after listening to her talk, you know, and show these slides over two slide projectors at the time, side by side, so she made sure she'd get through all the images in the time that she had, you know, one after the other, and it's kind of overwhelming, you say. Documentation of her views. What I thought was civilization, you know, before what we think of as civilization, I was like everybody else. You know, civilization begins at Sumer, and it's always been warfare, and it's always been weapons, and it's always been kings and rulers, and, you know, the Babylonians and whatever. And my knowledge of prehistory was very vague. And somehow before that we were killer apes. You know, there was a kind of, it was like straight from the killer apes with 2001, you know, the club coming down, which is also, of course, a false theory. But anyway, to the killer guys, and, you know, which is a very depressing view of history. Rian Eisler actually brought this out too, very, very clearly, that the level of technology is not the same as the level of culture. You know, we automatically assume, well, because we have, you know, computers, were more advanced than people who have only a pen or something, or a pencil, and because we have bombs, we're more advanced than people who had just swords. You know, and that's idiotic when you think about it, because that's just one aspect of technology. And what about all the other of culture? And what about all the other aspects of culture that don't have to do with the material technology or the weaponry, like health and well-being and happiness and aesthetics and the art, you know. And you look at the difference between the Minoan art with their flowers and the animals and the people dancing and the glowing color, and then the Mycenaean and the Hellenic art that comes afterwards with the square-shouldered soldiers with their swords and, you know, their spears and stabbing, and normally we'd say, well, came later, so it's an advance. But it came later, yeah, but it's not an advance, you know. It's just not so. This fixation on progress, which we have, which evolutionary science also denies. Evolution does not mean progress. Evolution means change and transformation, changing adaptations to changing conditions. And we're still fixated in this view that because we came later, you know, we're superior. This ties it to my whole approach to eco-psychology and what I call green psychology, how these cultures, human culture has gradually dissociated and connected itself from the natural world and seen itself as superior to the natural world. In my book, Well of Remembrance, which Marija wrote the foreword to, I look at these three layers of culture, and she provided the key to helping me understand that. The oldest layer being the old European layer, when their religious imagery is completely tied in with nature. All the gods and deity figures are half part animal and part snake and bird, and female body organs to emphasize the creativity and the productivity of life, the swelling of life, the exuberance of life. And then come the Indo-European with their male and their male-led families of gods, less tied in, but they preserve some aspects of the role of the feminine, and the feminine is honored in a certain way, like Freya is honored in Nordic, for example, as the goddess who the later gods like Odin actually learns from Freyr. He learns earth magic from Freyr. And the women, Freyr, they had these Völvas, the seeresses. The women were seeresses who could see into the past and see. And then you have, so the third layer is then Christianity suppresses them both, and is even more disconnected because it has this transcendental image of deity, that the deity is up in the heavens somewhere. So, and then of course later on you get the development of science and the Industrial Revolution. That's even a further step away from an embeddedness in nature, which was so. To me, meeting her and becoming aware of her work was nothing short of a revelation. And I think in time we'll come to see her as her contribution as being, like Ashley Montagu said, a benchmark in our understanding of what civilization is. Yeah, that was where she had the big dispute with her fellow archaeologists, and then she would say that, well, they just want to look at the material culture and the economics and how they made their living and all of that, and they don't want to go into the religious beliefs, as if that isn't part of the culture. Since when was that decided not to be part of the culture? See, I think that's a hangover from the split between science and religion that happened in the 16th century. Science is the same thing. See, science itself will never talk about spirituality or purpose or value or meaning or anything like that. They claim not to be value free, which is of course not true, as people have shown over and over. And they can't use purposes. They can't ever say that something evolved for this particular purpose. Like Lovelock was criticized for the Gaia theory, and people said it was teleological. And he said, no, it's not teleological. I can explain exactly how it works. It's a system maintaining itself. But it's like a taboo. And I think that came out of, what I say, it came out of that historical situation in the 16th, 17th century, where the scientists wanted to establish their credentials and their right to pursue knowledge unfettered by the limitations of the church. As you well know, then that phenomena in the last, I don't know, I guess the last 10 years of her life, or 10, 15 years of her life, more and more people outside of academia came, artists and writers and painters. Oh, I came across your book with all these goddess images, and I've been secretly painting images just like that for the last 20 years. I never knew they existed someplace else. I was actually I thought this was really weird, and nobody would know what they meant. And same with poetry and writing. So she had this phenomenal influence way beyond the academia, and that, of course, made the academics jealous and envious too. And they thought, just like Lovelock had the same thing. The feminist scholars and mythologically interested people latched onto the fact that he named his theory Gaia's theory rather than a new theory about homeostatic coupling between Earth processes and its environment or something like that, which he could have done, right? But he called it Gaia. So because William Golding, who was a novelist that lived his next door neighbor, suggested that for the view. So, and the scientists get very upset with him for putting purpose and mysticism into the hallowed halls of science. It's like religious wars still being fought. But individual scientists, like Lovelock, he doesn't care. He's not attached to the university, and it doesn't matter to him. But it was very touching for me to meet Marija, because in so many ways she made me aware of aspects of my own ancestry that I wasn't aware of, and it was because of her that but I had been going in that direction. I'd been studying because of my studies of shamanism. In shamanism, you work with spirits of animals and spirits of plants and spirits of places, of nature, spirits of ancestors, in order to do healing and divination. And That's the difference of shamanism, say psychology or psychotherapy, which I was trained in. You may work with, you try to solve problems and heal things, but you don't work with spirits of animals or plants or ancestors. I mean, you may work with mom and dad and how you feel about mom and dad and maybe your grandparents, but you don't work with the spirits of certainly not deceased ancestors. There's no such thing. According to the usual worldview, you can't communicate with somebody who doesn't exist. Death means non-existence. I was brought up with that same view, and it was all strange to me. But then I realized also other people had said that too. Robert Graves had said the same thing. Actually, in the 1950s, in his introduction to Greek mythology, he made the same point. You've got to understand the ecology of the Mediterranean if you want to understand these. Some of these myths are ecological. Some of them are historical. And he would give the historical events that would underlie certain stories. So that's what I found so fascinating too. Marija's pointing out that the residues of the old cultures live on in stories, live on in language and terms. She was such a phenomenal linguist. And they live on in folklore and fairy tales. Actually, one of my favorite examples of the survival of the goddess imagery, the cosmic goddess imagery even in our modern scientific worldview, is the name of our own galaxy. It's called the Milky Way. Why is it called the Milky Way? Because it's the stars, especially what do I mean? The Milky Way that we see. What's the what?
The galaxy.
Yeah, the stream of stars that we see in the night sky is called the Milky Way because it was the streaming of milk from the cosmic mother, from her breast. Sometimes a cow, the cosmic cow goddess, or from the mammal mother, the streaming mother. That's why it's called the Milky Way. So it's a residue of the recognition in our technical language. Same, actually, you could say for the word matter. The word matter is Latin materia. It's the mother. So even materialism is actually has the name of the mother goddess in it. But also another interesting thing that's very striking is what Marija calls, in the transition from the old Europeans to the Indo-Europeans, is the reversal of the symbolic value of black and white. And where for the old Europeans, black is the color of the earth, and because the fertile earth is very black, and when the blacker it is, the more fertile it is. And then the white is the color of death, because when you reduce to bones, it's all white. And whereas for the Indo-European, it's the other way around, because they worship the sky gods and the sun. They were the pastoral nomads. They're very dependent on the sun. And then so it's the Lord of the shining sky, and then the death is the underworld. It's a dark and dismal place, and that's really that's the symbolic value we've inherited. Black to us is negative mostly, as African Americans are often pointing out, and the general associations are. But for the old Europeans, it's the reverse. There's a poem that I wrote where I had this image of the triple goddess when my daughter was born, and my daughter is, her first name is Sophia, and her middle name is Marija, and is named after Marija, and Marija Gimbutas agreed to be her goddess mother, as you might say. And Marija's work in pointing out this earliest layer of civilization in the Western world, of being one that's completely embedded in the images of religion and spirituality, are completely embedded in the natural world, in these blended forms of part animal, part plant, part human, and with a recognition of the role of the feminine and the parallelism between the natural world and the nurturing, the principle, and really the Gaia. So what's happening, and for me also the connection there is in shamanism and animism. See, I talk about shamanism and animism and what Matthew Fox calls panentheism, the idea that the deity, the divine energy is within the creation, and animism being the belief that all of nature is animated by spiritual intelligence. It's not, as some people say, the projection of human consciousness into the natural world. It's the perception of the spiritual intelligence inherent in the natural world, which indigenous people have preserved. Indigenous people of North America and South America, they think of nature, they call nature all our relations. They think of it as family. They don't think of it as wilderness, much less do they think of it as resources, which is the way we think of it. You know, it's wilderness, it's wild, or it's resources. You know, and we turn the wilderness into resources. That's what we do. Anyway. So we know, and so the shift is to a worldview of, sometimes called an ecological worldview or a postmodern or a systems worldview, which focuses on a view in a system. Everything is interrelated, everything is interconnected. It's a web of life, and that's really the web. The web of life is the worldview of the ancient Indo-European people and the people that came before, the old Europeans, even more so. So she's given us a new understanding of our history, of the history of culture, and the changes in not denying the progress that's been made in technology, but pointing out that certain things and certain values and principles have been lost or diminished at the same time. And that needn't continue. It's our choice. It's completely our choice. It's our choice as to what we believe in and what we choose to put energy into. And nobody can say that the system we have now and the approach that we have now is working. It's not working. It's making an unbelievable... I mean, the economy may be booming temporarily for certain sectors of society, but that doesn't mean anything. I mean, the world is... the world global system is in an unbelievable disaster in the making, right before our very eyes, where you have tens of thousands of people living off of garbage in cities like Manila and all this kind of thing, and global warming. We're actually affecting the climate of the entire biosphere. So something is clearly drastically wrong, and so we're in no position to thumb our noses at any revisioning of our story, of our history, of our prehistory, and a deeper understanding of how we came to be where in this position that we are, and therefore having the possibility of remembering something. See, Mima is the remember. We want to remember. We want to drink again from the well of remembrance so we can remember what we once knew. We don't have to invent sustainability from scratch. We already knew it. And the indigenous people that are alive today and still survive, they know about sustainability, otherwise they wouldn't still be here. That's by definition, right? They've been sustainable for tens of thousands of years, and we've been around for 400 years with our system, and what a mess we've made of it. So in that sense, I see her work as paralleling the work of the deep ecologists, the ecofeminists, and paralleling the work of the people who are trying to recapture a sense of approaches to healing that are natural and that use natural, pay attention to lifestyle and nutrition and diet and herbal medicine rather than high-tech interventions, and back to farming and agriculture that uses organic methods rather than pesticides and herbicides and this over-reliance on artificially stimulated, and back to local, bioregional, place-oriented, place-honoring, respecting other forms of life as having value in themselves, as the deep ecologist said, having intrinsic value, not just use value for us to do with whatever we want to. So to all these cultural movements of really a cultural transformation movement, she's added an absolutely central point, which is a much deeper and more accurate, correct understanding of our earliest history and prehistory, which can have wonderfully healing effects for all of us and may contribute to getting us back on a path of sanity and well-being.